The last time we spoke was you were about a month into this Curatorial Commissions project, and you were really sort of settling in. And it was great to sort of hear your initial feelings about it. You've been there 4.5 months now. Are you starting to feel a bit more curatorial than arty?
I'm starting to feel like I know more about curation. I wouldn't say that that's overtaken my kind of sense of identity as an artist, although because all the things I'm doing at the moment don't involve getting my hands dirty, I'm not making any actual things at the moment, so I feel a bit frustratingly distant from being an artist at the moment.
Yeah. Can that feel quite bad actually? I mean, is that something you expected or not expected? You know, that distance from the feeling of creation.
I think as usual I've kind of underestimated how much time everything takes, and I thought I would still have time to do other things around it, and there hasn't so much been the time between doing unlimited stuff and doing the Dash Curatorial. There hasn't been time for me to like make a thing, basically.
Yeah. Well, I'm not surprised. I think when you start any shift in career, and it's quite a step change, isn't it, from creating things to managing other people's creations in a sense, that it's quite a big step change. There's a lot to learn, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a different mindset, it's a different way of thinking. I think when I'm making stuff, I get to be completely selfish and please myself on exactly what I want to make. I've never been someone who cared very much about what other people thought of my work, whereas in curation I kind of have to approach it diametrically the opposite way, and it's thinking about, you know, your audience and who you're assembling a show for, and and you have to be selfless in a way that I'm not at all in my artwork.
That's really interesting. I hadn't even considered that. I mean, obviously I've worked in television, and you're always making things for an audience, and you know or you hopefully know what they are wanting to see, or you'd like to present them with. Are you likely to come across bits of artwork that you think will really work well as a curator, but you look at them and go, ooh, I don't like that at all?
Like a schism between what I like personally and what would be good. I'm sure that would easily happen, but I think it's obviously something where your personal taste comes into play a lot, and it'd be interesting to make sure that you don't try and pretend that your taste is more objective than it really is. Yeah,
how objective do you really have to be curator, or is there an element of subjectivity? They want to see what you create.
So I think actually that kind of goes to the root of the whole programme, and to kind of this whole endeavour is about trying to get underneath nepotism and trying to get people to sort of maybe curate in a new way, and so actually I think it's really important for me to be super objective, or as much as I possibly can be, because if you're a curator, you know, whether you like it or not, you are one of the gatekeepers, and if we're trying to make it more accessible for people who aren't getting the work under the eyes of curators generally, then if you just fall into the same trap and be completely subjective, and it's like, you know, what your other curator friends are talking about on Instagram, then you're just going to become part of the same system and the same wheel that turns.
I think everybody who has a new challenge in career, they come across things that they didn't expect. Have you come across things so far in your process of learning the art of curating that you think, oh, didn't know that was important, or I hadn't thought about that before?
Yeah, it all works quite differently from how I'd imagined. So I can't remember if we talked about this last time. So there are things like touring exhibitions that I didn't know anything about, which are like, if one gallery's put together a show maybe from a collection or something, then they can tour it to other galleries, and other galleries, if they've got like a gap in their schedule and they don't have time to put something together and curate it, it's kind of like an off the peg kind of show, and I found that really interesting. I suppose if I'd stopped to think about it, I must have realised that was one of the things that happened in the infrastructure of the art world, but that was new. And understanding some of the ins and outs of how to put together a show and the kind of elements of borrowing things and how that's different depending on whether you're borrowing from an artist, from a collection, from an estate. All of that stuff has been surprising and interesting. And how in things like just the basic budgets, how the numbers split up, the money doesn't go where you think it goes. It's just all sorts of unexpected things.
It's interesting. We were chatting earlier about the fact that as your own personal artwork has become bigger and larger in scale and doing more things, you felt that sort of project management element coming in. Presumably, being a curator is very much about being a project manager.
Yes, I think that's probably quite a fair description. It's definitely lots of lists and spreadsheets and trying not to forget things. And yeah, I do find that quite challenging. I have a lot of memory problems and I have a lot of executive function problems, so it kind of falls squarely into stuff that I struggle with because of my disabilities, and it's something I was quite worried about from the start actually, as to whether I would be able to be adequate for the job given that that's the case. So I don't know, we'll see, I guess.
How do you think that's worked with your mentors at MAC? Because they've had to be obviously aware of that, and presumably do they adjust things to make that work for you, or have you had to slot into something that is essentially built for people who don't have those sort of challenges?
A bit of both. I mean, there's only people are kind and they let me take my little notes and tag things while I'm talking to them, so I can make sure that even though I know I won't remember, I can kind of recall things later if I look under the right tags and stuff. But there is also, it's always like this with access, there's like, people can do as much as they can do, but you can't change reality kind of thing, and the reality is you just need to kind of be able to organise a lot of information to be able to do this, and that kind of hits a bit of a brick wall access wise. There's not anything further to be done about that, I think.
When you're dealing internally with MAC, then they're all aware of that. How does that work when you have to deal with people outside of MAC?
I mean, I've tried to be quite transparent from the start, even though I've sort of struggled a bit with being as honest as that. But yeah, it's been rewarding and refreshing to just be able to say, yes, I probably won't cope with this aspect very well, and for people to just be okay with that. But yeah, it's like a nice little cosseted world for someone like me, which is kind of the opposite to the real world, where nobody is interested in changing things to make them accessible, or in seeing the ways in which you can contribute if it was made accessible. If you can't fit into the structures of the world as it is, then you're kind of on the rubbish heap, and that's my experience in the kind of larger world. Yeah.
Bit tangentially to that, just coming off the back of that, if at the end of this process you find yourself as either in a year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years as a curator, as your mainstay of occupation, is that something you would be, it would be fundamental to your work to change the accessibility to the logistics of things?
God, it's something to think about, isn't it? I don't even know how one would approach that. I mean, there's a guy from Vice doing an article about how technology is helping artists with disabilities, and when he asked me about it, I said it's kind of having software like Evernote has completely, been a game changer for someone like me, because I used to live with kind of, giant stalagmites of bits of paper everywhere.
I know that feeling, yeah.
And it was just unnavigable. Whereas now, because I can retrieve things using tags, I can just type in my Mac tag and I've got every bit of information about Mac at my fingertips there if I need it. So it doesn't make the problem any better, but it's like a much more effective solution than was available before. So I don't know if there are sort of further things like that can help people, or what I could do specifically.
It would be nice to think that we can all do something moving that way as we go forwards. I think some of the problems we've encountered at Dash from looking at technology is that a lot of the technology is written by people who have no challenges at all. So it's meant to be accessible, but they just haven't even realised that it isn't accessible one way or another. All power to you if you're going to change that, I would say. Going back to MAC itself, though, there's a lot of change going on at MAC at the moment. People moving around, people doing things. And when you're only sort of a third into a programme, how's that affected you?
It is quite turmoily, I won't lie, but I think it's going to be okay, it's going to settle down. So obviously what you're referring to is my mentor, the curator Jess, has left MAC, but she will be staying on for the duration of the Dash project to continue to mentor me and produce the show. But it means I'm sort of split between two contacts, if you like. There's the person who's mentoring me for the show, and then there's kind of the MAC side of things, and they're kind of now two different strands. But yeah, I think it'll be okay.
It's good to hear. With regard to the show, what is the next stage? And obviously Jess has moved on, but she's keeping that contact and mentoring for it. We talked about last time that you decided on what you wanted the theme of your show to be, to dovetail with stuff that's on at MAC. What's the next stage now? You're 4 months into creating that show.
So the show I'd like to do is going to be on the disability arts movement, and for various reasons that fits in with the programming at MAC. They've got a show in the main gallery at the same time that's kind of got an activist element to it, and it was something I was quite keen to do. The next stage really is to do a lot of research to figure out, who the key players are in the movement, and research, where the works reside that I'd want to get my hands on, and that kind of thing. It feels slightly complicated in that there's actually just not a lot out there on this. So in the research I've done, really the most effective way to do the research is to talk to the key players themselves. So rather than the kind of normal order it would be in, where you sort of do your research and then approach people, I sort of have to approach people to do the research, which adds a kind of layer of kind of complexity to it all. But yeah, that's where we are. That's
really interesting, and presumably by doing that you'll get a lot of really incredibly interesting first-hand knowledge of that period of time and that movement, but you'll get lots of different views as well at the same time.
Yeah, and that's where this kind of idea of trying to grasp onto some objectivity will matter, I think, because I'll try and sift all of those different points of view and arrive at something that kind of balances everything. What it would be nice to do is include as many people as possible, but that wouldn't be right for the space. Having discussed it through with the MAC people, we need to just feature several key artists, and hang things around that. And so I already feel this kind of terrible responsibility of like who I'm going to leave out and who will feel like they're not represented, and like I'm doing gatekeeping already kind of thing. And my instinct is to be the opposite and try and let everybody in, but that will make for far too scattergun a show, so it's got to be a little bit more focused than that. So I have to make quite key decisions about which artists to include, unfortunately.
Is that a good or a bad thing, do you think, for you personally, having to focus down and think, right, I have to make decisions that I normally wouldn't make? Or is it just different?
I just don't like being the person who gets to say yay or nay in that way, like the Roman emperor with the thumbs up or thumbs down. But that is the role of curation, and that's what being that gatekeeper is. And at least I do sweat about it, and I will be thinking really carefully about, good rationale for who to include and why, rather than quite like this person, so they can be in kind of thing. I'm trying to do less of that.
As you got more into the subject matter of the show, and you realise you have to, the information isn't out there, you have to go and get it first hand. It's almost like oral history, isn't it? You've got to get in there and take this information from people. Has that made you more dedicated to the show, the subject matter, or is it become a little bit more difficult for you?
I think both, because it's going to be a challenge, I think, and particularly the timescales involved. There's a lot to do in the time, and yeah, it's not at all clear whether that's achievable. So I think it's definitely already become like a pet project that I really want to kind of see come to fruition and be really good as I can make it in the available time and funds kind of thing.
What is really good news though is that you're not actually going in completely cold now, are you? Because you are already in the process of curating material for MAC.
Yeah, that's a kind of corollary of Jess leaving, is that they're getting a sort of freelance curator in to do the shows in the big gallery. But they have, for example, their studio gallery where they have the work made from their own classes and by tutors and things. And so I'm going to be curating that space, and then there'll be a textiles show in that space afterwards that I'll curate. And that's quite a nice little kind of soft landing to start with, because things like the exhibition design have already been sorted out. So there's an extent to which I can kind of just Lego block things into roughly spaces that have been allocated for the first one, the Made at Mac show. So it's quite nice. I can sort of have a little bit of pure curation and just sort of pick things, liaise with techs as to how to display them, and go ahead and do it before the textile show will then be slightly more. I'll have a hand in the exhibition design for that really, as well as the curation. So yeah, there's a few little bits I can kind of practice and yeah.
How did you feel when they said, well, by the way, we'd like you to actually become a curator here at MAC, which is essentially what you are now?
Well, I don't know if I put it like that.
No, that's
to be honest with you, we were having a meeting with Sonia, who is the learning and participation person, and they were trying to figure out how they were going to sort it all out for when Jess was away. And I said, do you know what, I'm happy to do it. I think I could do that for both the textile show and the Made at Mac show. And I think that was convenient for everybody. So.
Did you expect to hear yourself saying that? Would you have expected to hear yourself saying that 6 months ago?
Yeah, maybe not. I wouldn't know if people would trust me, but no. I feel reasonably confident that I can handle it now. So I hopefully have learned enough that it makes sense, both about MAC as an institution and how things work, and also, more generalised stuff about curation.
When we spoke last, you mentioned one of the things that you hadn't really counted on was the amount of time it took to do things, and the travelling backwards and forwards really took it out of you. Is that something that you still feel the weight of, or that how there are other things that have come on board that have made it easier, or other things you've come across that you didn't expect?
I do still feel it. I've kind of started to crawl in later and later, to be honest with you. And that's kind of interesting, because the more I sort of push myself in the morning, when I tend to feel most ill first thing, and if I kind of push through that, then I'll end up having to book a quiet room and have rest time to compensate for that during the day. Whereas if I started off later and I get in later, then I could actually function for longer. So it's kind of a trade-off thing, and I was really worried about that for a time, as to whether, because there's just that workplace culture generally in our society of kind of having your bum on your seat and being seen to be there kind of thing, and just from trying and failing to do other normal 9-to-5 type jobs, I have a lot of anxiety about that. But again, because it's worked around access needs for me, everybody was kind of okay with that. So yeah, I'm sort of managing the travel, I think, and it's a kind of balance between, particularly now that I'm going to be organising the show, and a lot of it will be sort of phoning people and emailing people, which I can do remotely, and there's not a lot of point in travelling in for that. But at the same time, I want to be around and sort of making sure that I'm there for people to ask questions of if anything comes up, and sort of maintaining the relationships I have forged there. So it's a bit of a kind of balance again as to what's the optimum amount of time to spend going in and being there and travelling and stuff.
Just to wrap up this particular time, we've recently managed to add our third gallery or our third institution to the programme, and so the Wysing Gallery are going to be joining us. So they're not too far from here, actually, really, about half an hour from here. How do you feel about now being part of a bigger overall project where you're going to have people doing parallel things, obviously with different outcomes, but doing the same type of project with the same type of ends around the country, that you can contact, you can share those experiences. How does that feel to be a trailblazer? Because they're all going to be coming to you, aren't they?
Oh, I don't know. I'm not sure what help it'd be. I mean, I think it's quite nice, yeah, because there'll be like this team of people who've done a similar thing, both in terms of the gallery side and the curator side, and so it'll be a nice little kind of network of support and development, and hopefully a kind of legacy of institutions and individuals to kind of